Hurricane Harvey was the first major hurricane to strike the USA since 2005. The storm made landfall in Houston, causing widespread damage, mostly from flooding. And then Harvey was followed by Hurricane Irma, which landed in Florida.
Whenever we see a catastrophic storm like Hurricane Harvey,
30 inches of rain ahead.
we have to ask if it has anything to do with man-made climate change.
So does climate change mean these kinds of events will become a grimly inevitable prospect in our future?
But with two major hurricanes, one after another, is this perhaps something else, an act of man, or at least man-made climate change?
The return of hurricanes has excited many climate change campaigners, and even some scientists have blamed both storms on climate change. But was there anything unusual about these extreme weather events? Can we detect a human influence on these storms, as has been widely reported? Climatologist Professor Judith Curry says no.
These aren't particularly unusual as far as hurricanes go. I mean, they're top 20, kind of storms, but they're not record-breaking in any way. Apart from the overall rainfall from Harvey, which was really more a fluke of the weather situation. It allowed the storm to sit in one place for a very long time. There's nothing particularly unusual about this hurricane season or about Harvey and Irma. I mean, the U.S. had an incredibly lucky run of 12 years without a major U.S. landfall, during this active phase, of the hurricane cycle. So we were incredibly lucky. And, our luck is now broke, but it's, totally expected.
The coastal region of the southwest United States has a long history of hurricanes, the most deadly claiming 8,000 lives in Galveston, Texas in 1900. Since then, and in spite of climate change, the human costs caused by hurricanes have fallen. But around the world, the news media have carried stories about climate change worsening hurricane frequency and intensity.
This storm is more severe because of climate change. Exactly what the scientists predicted and exactly what happened.
It's amping up our heat waves, our wildfires, our droughts, and even our hurricanes.
At one time, Hurricane Harvey and the catastrophic flooding it's caused would have been referred to as the storm of a century. But Texas has increasingly bore the brunt of floods and more intense weather, something many scientists are linking to global warming.
This is a preview of the future. There is no doubt that climate change makes, particularly because of warming the ocean waters and the Gulf waters, makes storms like this more common.
So these natural disasters are in part, or at least the effects of them are in part man-made.
But these claims too have no foundations in science.
Well, we only have good satellite data back to maybe 1980. We have some satellite data going back to 1970, but it's of lesser quality. So we don't have long global records, but in the Atlantic we have pretty good historical records, at least for the landfalling hurricanes. Not necessarily for the total number in the basin.
According to the observational record, the number of hurricanes of all categories landing on the US has reduced in frequency, and there's no convincing evidence of hurricanes or tropical cyclones increasing in intensity, frequency, or accumulated energy. In spite of the science, however, the story of increasing extreme weather persists.
This is a drastic storm. And how many drastic storms do you want to have before you actually take action?
I worry that we might not be able to recover from this because all our greatest cities are on the oceans and water's edges.
All the world's scientists agree what happened. They all agree that the storms are worse because of climate change.
That the increased damage and destruction we're seeing with these storms is related to the fact that we're warming the planet, we're warming the oceans, there's more energy in these storms.
It's impossible for the hurricane not to have been affected by climate breakdown.
Climate change is making hurricanes like Irma, like Harvey, more severe and more likely.
At the centre of these stories is the way hurricanes are born. They form over large bodies of warm water, drawing energy from evaporation and the Earth's rotation. But, says Judith Curry, sea surface temperature is not the whole story.
Sea surface temperature is only one ingredient for hurricane development and intensification. And it doesn't seem to just be absolute sea surface temperature either. So it's more relative sea surface temperature and the overall dynamics of the atmosphere that are arguably the key ingredients, not just absolute sea surface temperature itself. I mean, you can go back and there were really strong hurricanes, you know, in the 19th century, for example, when surface temperatures were significantly cooler. So, and there were some horrendous hurricanes in the Atlantic in the early part of the 20th century when sea surface temperatures were noticeably cooler.
This is a more complex picture of what causes hurricanes than the one presented by many commentators. And many have been keen to draw a direct link between human activity and hurricanes. But even according to mainstream climate science, as represented by NOAA and the IPCC, global warming might only increase the intensity of storms by as little as 2 to 11% by the end of the century. Claims that the effects of climate change can be seen in hurricanes are premature, given the high degree of natural variability seen in these events.
We're probably looking at a shift in the Atlantic to the cool phase of the Atlantic multidecadal oscillation. In 1995, after a relatively quiet period in the Atlantic, we flipped to the warm phase of the Atlantic multidecadal oscillation, and that really juiced up the hurricanes. And so at some time, probably order 10 years, we'll see a flip to the cool phase again, and presumably much quieter situation in the Atlantic for hurricanes.
The danger is that claims about global warming and extreme weather are a diversion from the real issues that affect people's lives. Indeed, such strong statements about hurricanes and other extreme weather events are not based on the science as we understand it, and they may misdirect policies.
In terms of trying to figure out how to manage extreme events and reduce our vulnerability, what's causing it is almost a secondary concern. I mean, we're not preparing for the events we have now or the events we've seen in the 20th century, let alone for the events that we might see in the latter part of the 21st century.
Disaster resilience and preparedness are the best policies against hurricanes and other extreme weather events, regardless of the influence of carbon dioxide or climate change.